group discipleship environment over the past year. I had another pastor tell us, like, churches who major in discipleship, if they hit 50%, they're like pumped. So that's a shout out to all of you who, this is like a demonstration that you value following Jesus to the degree that you are willing to enter into regular community with other disciples. Secondly, I'm going to give the shout out to Blake Deichler. Blake, this is literally one of the most exciting things I think that has happened in our church this year. Blake kind of sees his football team as his mission field, and on his own accord, on his own, taking on responsibility himself, he created an event. I think Brad spoke, I think Jesse sang. Where's Jesse? You sang, right? Yeah. Blake organized this, though, and created space for 13 other OU football students to get baptized, and one of their moms got baptized too. Wow. And that is just, give a shout out. Let's applaud what Jesus is doing on the football team, right? That is just evidence of one of our disciples in our church family taking ownership of their mission field, and that is so exciting. On the baptism note, we had 4 baptisms back in July, and we had a recommitment to their baptism, right? And that was spanning multiple generations. We had children, we had elderly, we had in between. One of the individuals, it was the action of them giving their lives to Jesus for the first time. This summer, number 4, we've been pursuing unity and love in Jesus Christ despite political differences. I don't know if y'all know, but people in this church vote on both sides of the political spectrum. And we have shown that we can still live as a family under Jesus despite that, and we celebrate that. And then lastly, giving a shout out to what God is doing in and through the Browns family, Jesse and Zoe, as they just kind of raise their hand and say, hey, God is doing something in our hearts that is leading us to say, hey, I think he's asking us to go overseas and provide people in another context with opportunity to respond to him. So not only people taking responsibility locally, but also asking the question, what does it look like to do that globally? And so when we look at Acts 2, verses 41 through 42, this is what it says about the early church. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And so the question is, what is the church? The church is God's family doing things like this. And we don't do things like this so that we can get accredited. We actually get accredited so that we hopefully can continue to support and uphold these things and see the multiplication of these things in our city. And so in the process of accreditation, this morning we'll be talking about some of the structures that we'll be implementing in our church family. And our prayer is that it just creates more opportunity for these things. Not just the planting of our church that is now accreditation, but the planting of disciples throughout our city, right? And so I'm going to pass the ball to Jim here in a second. But before I do that, you have a very important role this morning in our accreditation process. If you choose to vote this morning, you are kind of raising your hand metaphorically and saying, I am a member of this church family. And what does it mean to be a member of our church? Well, here's the 4 things that we believe if you say, I'm a member of this family, that I'm committing to. 1 is to following Jesus, which we define as growing in those 6 discipleship distinctives. We have like a yearly sermon on this. So this is growing in intimacy with God, growing in demonstrating through the Spirit, growing in stewarding the resources that God has given you, growing in exhibiting your spiritual gifts, growing in sharing your story of grace that God has given you. And then lastly, we call it area of accountability. This would be exactly what Blake did. Maybe it doesn't lead to 14 baptisms on one evening, but it would be saying, hey, God has given me a specific place or people as my mission field, and I'm going to be held accountable to representing Jesus to them. So follow Jesus. So if you vote today, you're saying, I'm committing to following Jesus in the context of this church family. Second, sharing life. So again, that 75%, I think this is already evidence in our church. We recognize that we cannot follow Jesus in isolation, that we are dependent upon one another. So there's a commitment to share life, not just with our area of accountability or like our mission field, but life with one another. And we see this evidenced in small group involvement. So let me pause 1 second. We are not going to mandate immediate small group involvement right now. But basically by voting and saying I'm a member, you're agreeing to having regular conversations about, is this the right season for me to be in a small group? We don't necessarily expect everyone to be in a small group every week of the year. We know there's crazy seasons. We know, for example, our church likes to have children, and it's hard to be in a small group with a new baby, right? But there is a commitment to saying, hey, I'm going to seek opportunity to share life with the disciples around me throughout the year. Celebrate God's work. We do that on Sundays where we gather as a church family to celebrate what God has done this past week, evidenced by like our testimony time. We look forward to what God's going to do the next week. We gather around his word. It is the day of celebration. So there's an agreement that I'm going to regularly seek participation in our church family celebrating God's work. And then lastly, Mika kind of spoke to this a little bit. We're part of a broader denomination called the Christian and Missionary Alliance. And their kind of slogan is all of Jesus for all the world. And we have a heart to send missionaries, a heartbeat that Jesse and Zoe have caught. And so there is an agreement to say, hey, I may not be called to go on missions overseas myself, but I will regularly discern how I can be a part of supporting what God is doing overseas in our denomination through prayer, finances, relationship, right? And we just did that the past, it was just a few weeks ago, like when the Bears are having Rachel into their house and all the teens are asking her a bunch of questions, right? What?
We ate pine cones with her.
You ate pine cones. See, that's what missionary support looks like. Eat pine cones with your missionaries, right?
It was weird.
But these are the things that you're committing to as a church family, saying these are the things we value and these are the things I will live into as being part of this church family. So on that note, just know if you vote, these are the things you are saying, I am in agreement with these and want to enter into this with this church family. And on that note, I will pass the ball to Jim, who is going to facilitate this meeting. Yeah, Jim!
So he gets the fun part, I get the boring part. There is a legal entity behind what we're doing here. There is rules and responsibilities, and that's somewhat of what I represent. You'll notice that I have a white shirt on and no one else up here does. So there's a level of transparency that we really are striving to operate within. And so they'll have questions about money, budgets, leadership. They'll elect and vote some of those folks. So that's real, that's your responsibility, and that's what we're striving as we operate for that transparency. If there's any questions, please, there's lots of folks you can come ask for that. And so that's really what I'm going to do here is facilitate some of these votes. But it's really to operate and run an organization that the church represents. So that's it's pretty straightforward of what I'm doing. If there's ever a timeline where speakers have a certain amount of time to speak, you should always put an introvert right in the middle because they're going to keep you on schedule. So that's the role that I'm playing right now. And we'll pass it on.
Jim is the best of all of us, for sure. Jim is. We're just going to address these things both practically and theologically, our bylaws, governance, and our budget. And I'm going to talk about bylaws, which is never a thing I thought I would ever have to do. Here I am. Accreditation in the Alliance is largely about structure and it's about order. It's no secret that any organization can be overstructured, and most organizations are overstructured. Raise your hand if you feel like you're part of one of those. So much red tape, so much bureaucracy, so many things that are happening. Brandon didn't raise his hand because he wants more. No, I'm just kidding. Many adoptions of structure make them slow, ineffective, often self-serving, right? We just exist to preserve ourselves. And if you've worked in any workplace that had to walk through any employee training, you know that there are rules, some that make sense and some that don't. Right? You ask, how did this thing become a rule? And you found out that, Bob McGuffin brought his pet snake to work one day because there was no rule against it. and now it's like a main heading about pets in the employee manual, and you're not allowed to do anything like that. He did it in the 70s, and now you can't have a candle on your desk, right? That's how those things work. That's not what we're doing here, right? We actually see God's intention for order and for structure on the very first pages of Scripture. As soon as you open the book, God takes the formless and the unmade and the raw material of the void, and he does what? He brings order to it. He creates divisions. He creates boundaries. He puts things in their place. He gives them each a unique purpose for existing. It even says that the day cannot invade the night, right? Or the stars are different than the earth. Or the waters cannot go up onto the land. This is how the Hebrews interpreted how God made everything in order. Everything works according to its kind. He calls this work good, right? The sky is not less of a sky because it has a boundary or rules that make it work. A lack of boundaries would actually violate the integrity of what it means to be the sky, or what it means to be the earth, and what it means to be a created creature. And so I say all this simply to say that as we take on a more formal structure in accreditation, which we've tried to make as clear as possible. If you've read the bylaws, great. If not, please vote for them anyway. The hope is not that it would mean bloat, right? It would be hard to believe that we would have bloat at the size and scale that we move, or slowing, or self-serving. The hope is that it would take on order, and that order would serve everything that Jesus wants to do in the city of Delaware, right? Polity, which is our church word for how churches are structured, shares a similar root to what word? Polities sounds like?
Poverty.
Poverty, close? That's just for me. Polity sounds like what? Policy or politics, right? Like they share polis is actually, the idea is all the way back in Plato's Republic, he said political theory has its grounding in one thing. How will we choose to live together? And so for the church, when we adopt a polity structure, we're saying this is how our church community will choose to live together. Formally, it brings order. It brings protection. It brings clarity. I should not be able to do whatever I want to do. Anyone else want to have a self-limiter like that, right? Like, I am not in charge. I may be a pastor and a leader, but I'm not in charge, right? There has to be a structure to these things, and that's important. So we will fight, and we will make mistakes, and we will hear things wrong, and we will lead ineffectively at times. That happens, but as a general rule, when emotions fail, which is often, you will fall to the lowest level of the structure you've established. And that's why bylaws matter, right? So when we vote in our bylaws in a moment, when Jim comes up here and does the legal part, we don't take these things on because we're like bored and we're just looking for stuff to do. We do it to protect our boundaries, to set rules of engagement, and hopefully to create safety and order internally so that Christ's church can thrive and be exciting and do everything he's asked us to do externally out into the world. There would be a reason for that. So outreach, service, church planting, leadership development, pastoral care, all of these things take place within the safe confines of these realities. Does that make sense? So I hope, it's my recommendation, that you accept the proposal of our bylaws. Jim?
There are a couple different ways we can run the votes. With larger organizations, oftentimes you write down, they'll pass out paper, you'll write down if you accept or not, and then you can collect them, count them, put them in order. In some smaller situations as we are today, you can do it verbally. We're going to say, do you agree? The words are going to come out like, all in favor say aye. Okay? And then the count is your verbal aye. Then I'm going to ask for those who disagree, and that's going to be all opposed. Okay? So there's two ways to do this. We're doing it verbally today just because of the size of the organization. So if you are in support of, I'm going to ask you to say so. If you're opposed to, I'm going to ask you to say so. Does that all make sense? We have a man in the back. His name's Brad. And he is going to take some notes and some minutes about this so that we can record this for the stop yelling. So we can record this for the formality that it needs to be. Okay? Any questions? Hearing none, I present that we adopt the bylaws for DelCo Alliance Church. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Congratulations, the bylaws have passed. Wow. Yay!
Steven, do we need to make a motion to approve before we vote?
I'll second.
Second it?
So moved. I'll leave that to Jim. The legal.
We've already presented that because it's been there for review. And so from that process, it's already been presented. Okay? Excellent.
Thank you, Jim. So now I'm going to speak to governance a little bit. Hear God's word from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And so our hope, our desire, and even in obedience in creating a governance structure with a board and some of the supporting structures around it that I'll talk about is to just lean into this reality.